So let's take a look at one strong 40k army list for every single faction in the new Pariah Nexus meta. We'll look at just one example from each army that's doing well right now. Before we start, I thought I'd just mention the channel dice that are available as well. If anyone wants some channel dice with a nice shiny logo on, there's still a fair few of the white ones left. There are links down below in the video description for any who are interested. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking strong army lists. And in this video I thought it would be good just to get a taste of what each army has to offer in Pariah Nexus, with one example of what every faction is using to do well. All of these army list examples are things that people have used to go at least 4-1 or better in a grand tournament over the past couple of weeks. Not necessarily the absolute optimised thing to run for every faction, but just one example that one good player has managed to run to some success. And generally it means that they've been kind of stress tested. If you manage to win a bunch of games at a grand tournament, you're guaranteed to have gone up against good players who know what they're doing. For this one I thought I'd look at army lists that are completely different to the ones that I talked about last week. There were a few big tournament winners that are featured in the previous video for this one, though I thought for this one I'd mix it up and look at different lists for those same factions. Loads to talk about though, so let's jump straight into it and talk through the lists. First up, and starting with the Imperium, we have the Space Marines. This list by a Pontus Cock was used to take first at a tournament that I'm going to try and pronounce Flesket Ersvat, probably butchering that in all sorts of different ways. In any case, Space Marines have been struggling a bit recently, but this list went 5-0 with an Ultramarines Gladius at a smallish grand tournament of 31 players. This one takes the tried and tested combo of Marneus Calgar and Uriel Ventris, quite often showing up in Vanguard, but it looks like they're Gladius here. And they also have a lieutenant with the sword and shield and the fire discipline enhancement. I'm a little bit uncertain as to exactly where the characters attach. My guess would be that perhaps Uriel goes with the assault intercessors, as they could potentially give him the rerolls to wound on objectives, and perhaps Calgar with the company heroes, making really quite a big tough unit with him and his extra blade guard attendants. Then I guess that the lieutenant will probably go with the Hellblasters as opposed to adding himself into the company hero block, and then something out of that could deep strike, either the Hellblasters to get the jump on the enemy with all the fire discipline goodness. That would be my guess as to be the case, and then maybe Marneus Calgar and the company heroes could ride in the Land Raider Redeemer, really quite a big chunky unit to get delivered into combat at long range there. Obviously a bit of uncertainty there. I feel like there's genuinely different ways that you could have gone with them. Otherwise there's 3 units of jump intercessors with power fists and plasma pistols, just generally really efficient at skirmishing with enemy units and good for secondaries when there's so many actions and things going along in Pariah Nexus. Certainly the Hellblasters with the lieutenant are a pretty massive firepower threat. Lethal and sustained hits on a 5+ potentially makes them really savage. There's a unit of Incursors to make 1 unit +1 to hit, a unit of Infiltrators that might likely be used to screen a backfield objective if deep strikers are about, and a unit of Scouts to hold down the midfield. Finally, in addition to that Impulsor and Land Raider Redeemer that's still here despite the increased points cost, there's another couple of Gladiator Lancers just to lend a hand for some very serious anti-tank firepower to destroy things at long range. Overall, plenty of scary stuff there. Quite a well-balanced Gladius list with a number of different elements. I'm sure it will make the Codex proud. Next up, for the Imperial Guard, they had really quite a big shake-up in the last update. Big nerfs to their artillery and having their reinforcement stratagem limited, but they did get some upgrades to tanks with the whole Born Soldiers change. As a result, looks like someone's managed to make a very tank-heavy Imperial Guard army work pretty well. Taylor John Morton used this to take 4th at the Field of Flames GT, going 4 wins to 1 loss. For the tank side of things, there's a Demolisher tank commander who has Grand Strategist to provide some more armoured orders. He won't get the lethal hits, but still being able to fire in death and getting extra orders is a good advantage. And then for the bulk of the armoured might, there's 2 Rogue Dawn battle tanks, which are just really intimidating stat lines. They've got oppressor cannons, pulverizers, melter sponsons, and extra stubbers, and then 3 further Lehman Russ to go alongside them. A regular battle tank and a Lehman Russ Demolisher, each with the melter sponsons, and then a Lehman Russ Exterminator taking heavy bolter sponsons. I guess he's likely going to be sitting back and taking aim at things to hand out a bit of extra AP. Overall, that's a seriously intimidating amount of armour. A lot of lists would struggle to get through that amount of things. And beyond that, it looks like they're well supported by orders via Lord Solar and his Platoon Command Squad combo to allow him to broadcast orders to the tank commanders and other stuff. Gaunt's Ghosts are present, and really quite a nice thing to have in Pariah Nexus, being able to jump around the board doing actions. There's a unit of Scouting Kaschan Jungle Fighters, a couple of mortars in the infantry squad and the Lord Solar command squad, so you could potentially hand out fields of fire really reliably if you wanted. A small unit of Tempestus Scions to do secondaries and things, and a big squad of Bullgrin with the Mauls and Brute Shields to put down a whole load of muscle on a midfield objective. Finally, there's just 2 Scout Sentinels with las cannons, generally quite handy to have and fairly tough, particularly when you've got so much armour as well. Nice still to mark targets for tanks, even if it's just reroll ones to hit, and chip away with a bit of las cannon fire. Overall, certainly intimidating amount of guns there. I feel like the enemy would struggle to keep that contained and win any sort of direct firefight. Might be more about whether or not the enemy can outscore them and try and keep them from damaging their most important units with terrain maybe. Even if the brunt of the changes for the guard weren't great last time, it is quite nice to see tank guard actually be able to do well. Before we move on, I thought I'd just quickly mention one way in which you can help support Auspex tactics and videos if you wanted to. If you did happen to be ordering in any Warhammer models or other hobby supplies, with the channel's affiliate links down in the video description. I've got a bunch of channel links for around the world, Element Games in the UK for 15% off, Gap Games in Australia for 21% off, Fenris Workshop in Canada for 10% off, and Wargame Portal in the USA for 15% off. Can be a good way to save a little bit of money versus the Games Workshop web store, and anything bought through those after clicking the links in the video description does go to help support the channel a little bit, and doesn't cost you any more when you use them. A big thank you to any of you folks who happen to use those links. On to some more Imperial armies though, and next up we have the Adeptus Custodes. We saw the slightly crazy tournament-winning Normaiden task force last week, but this one's a bit more of a standard shield host, that detachment getting some really nice improvements, basically being better in melee all game long, and shield captains can actually work with the stratagems now, which is huge. This one was by Keenan Elliott, who used it to take 3rd at Geekfest Summer Heat GT, going 4-on-1 in a 32-player event. This one does feel like a lot more traditional Custodes and what I might have expected to come out of the data slate. Mostly fairly standard stompy custodians to march up the board, but this time throwing some Venatari into the mix. In this list there's 4 major blocks of infantry, 1 squad of Custodian Guard with Guardian Spears that likely go with Lord Inquisitor Kyria Draxus. She can protect them from enemy fire and also get some pretty insane shooting buffs on her own attacks. There's a big squad of Terminators with a shield captain in Terminator armour. He takes the Panoptic Spectre, ignores cover, and they can actually be surprisingly shooty if you use Archaeotech munitions on them. Being able to teleport across the board turn 1 if they want to could be pretty big too. And then there's 2 Blade Champions going with the Custodian Wardens, nice and tanky with their Feel No Pains once per game and the -1 to wound. The Blade Champions are fairly fearsome in combat and can deliver them at longer range. Otherwise, to support them, there's 2 squads of Venatari Custodians with the Lances. These guys are pretty amazing deals at 165 points I think, getting free rapid ingress and basically Guardian Spear type profiles and not really paying all that much of a tax to get a near guaranteed charge in the mid game. I feel like we're going to see a lot of Custodes lists using those. A more unit of Prosecutors, always handy to have for cheap investment for actions and objectives and things. Then finally a lone ranging shield captain on Jetbike with the From the Hall of Armourers enhancement, giving you +1 strength and damage to the bearer's melee weapons, so he's quite a big threat just in his own right. Interesting to see him with no squad at all. I guess a cheap fast moving unit that can pick off lighter enemy units out there. Overall pretty fun to see a new version of the shield host though, and Custodes doing a fair bit better in general. Next up, for the AdMech, they got a rather colossal amount of changes in the balance update, and I was interested to see what sort of things they'd come out with. One example of a list that's done well is this one by Samuel Martin, using it to take 6th at Dark Sphere GT, going 4-1 in a 57-player tournament. This one again is using the most popular Skitarii Hunter cohort detachment, the one where a lot of units get stealth at longer range, and has a bunch of useful stratagems such as Feel No Pain reactively, Shroud protocols to prevent shooting, and the Expedited Purge protocol to allow you to advance and charge. That one's really quite nice with the new Rust Stalkers that are actually legitimately scary with those blades. This one has Belisarius Call himself taking the helm, which is quite nice given the slew of buffs that he got last time round. I wonder if he's just giving some reroll ones to hit for those Iron Striders with the las cannons. They look like they're going to be putting out a fairly fearsome amount of anti-tank firepower. There's 2 units of 3 of them. Otherwise, there's 3 Skitarii Marshals along with a bunch of battle line, 2 units of Rangers and 3 units of 10 Vanguard. Pretty good to have lots of battle line around anyway for all of the Doctriner imperatives. And they take a bunch of the good enhancements. Cantic Thrallnet is better than ever, giving you both of the Protector and Conqueror imperatives. That's pretty massive given how much better they got. Veiled Hunter allows a nice redeploy, including putting things into Strategic Reserve, and Battle Sphere uplink. allows you to move, shoot, move, meaning that you can have some very fast moving Skitarii troops, and the Marshals all give you some nice hit rerolls as well, so the special weapons from the Rangers and Vanguard can have a fair bit more threat than normal. There's 2 Scorpius Dune Riders to transport some things about. I don't know whether or not that's going to be used for Rust Stalkers or a combination of the troops. Can be quite nice for either, and put out a fair bit of volume fire with their stubbers as well. There's 1 big unit of Taraxi Sterilizers, which can be a nice option to jump off the board and return to strategic reserve with programmed withdrawal. You could have them bounce around flaming things and then return into reserves if they're unengaged. 2 units of Scouting Screening Cerberus Raiders, 1 unit of Infiltrators to take the midboard with some Taser Goads, and Lord Inquisitor Kyria Draxus once more. Not sure what squad she's going to be joining, I guess maybe one of the Vanguard units perhaps. Again, being able to hide units from being able to be shot by enemies is quite nice. She's got quite a lot of shooting and can benefit from things like the reroll wounds from the Dune Riders. Overall, a cool example of what AdMech can do. And it's quite nice to see the army looking quite a lot more dangerous again. I feel like there's a lot more units that you'd actually be scared of here compared with before, even if this one is choosing to go heavy on these Skitarii bodies still. Next up we've got Sisters of Battle, and this one is using the Bringers of Flame detachment, run by Jerome L. Dussy, who used its take first at Geelong 40K Open. The Bringers of Flame does seem to be by far the most competitively used Sisters detachment. It's the one that gives you the advance and shoot with assault and +1 strength within 12 inches, both of which are pretty great for Sisters close range firepower, and they do have some other good things for the detachment as well. It's led by a Canoness with a jump pack and hand flamer who has Fire and Fury, the one that allows you to get more hits with flame weapons. So she'd be joining one of the 2 big units of Seraphim, absolutely nuking the enemy with a whole bunch of Strength 5 hand flamer hits there, and also getting devastating wounds when they need them. Could be hard to catch up with them as well due to their move, shoot, move. There's then Morven Var and a unit of Paragon Warsuits, really quite fragile on the defensive, but absolutely enormous threat against everything when they get a single turn to act. If they could rapid ingress in, or even just turn up from reserves, the multi-melters can just ruin any monsters and vehicles around, and with Var's rerolls, they can body the heart of an army if they get chance to. The Triumph of St. Catherine is here, 190 points for a bunch of helpful central auras, and just a big annoying tough thing to take down. It can allow you to move things faster, so potentially have things like Immolators go extra far, or get various damage and defensive type buffs, plus the all-important Miracle Dice per 6 each and every round, just fantastic reliability for that alone. Then there's a whole bunch of Dominions, 3 units of 10 of them with 2 squads of Flamers and 1 squad of Melters. Looks like they're all going to be split in half by 3 Immolators, means that you get a lot of cheap objective grabbers. The Immolators can scout with them up the board and then deliver all of that special weapons into the enemy army very early in the game. 2 of the Immolators take multi-melters and 1 takes the Immolation Flamers. The remaining Dominion squads could be used to try and farm objectives and perhaps scout up 2 things in the midboard as well. Finally, there's 2 Castigator tanks, both with battle cannons. They can put out a fairly scary amount of firepower in themselves, and also have that AP debuff rule now, which works out great with things like the Hand Flamers or the Ministorum Flamers from the Dominions. Lots and lots of hits with good AP is going to kill most things. Overall, looks like a list with just fairly terrifying damage output between all the things here. Particularly there's 2 squads of Scary Seraphim, might threaten to delete most normal size infantry units in the game in a single round of shooting, and plenty of nasty melters to go around as well. Next up for the Grey Knights, they got a few points increases in the last update, Dread Knights going up a bit but still seem to be doing okay. This list was run by Tequila Grey, who used it to take 5th at a Tormentor de Hostias GT, going 5-1 against 62 players. This one's dropped the Librarians altogether, which are often quite a popular choice with their mortal wounds. They did go up in cost once more. Instead, this one's led by Caldor Drago himself, who can pretty much guarantee a charge out of Deep Strike, either with the Paladins or the Terminators, I guess. A Grandmaster in Dread Knight with Incinerator, Psy Cannon and Hammer, and his big rerolls against tanks and vehicles. He's got Inescapable Wrath, so a +1 to charge could mean that he's got a bit more chance of charging out of Deep Strike. And then there's a regular Grandmaster with an Incinerator and his command point thing. He has the Sigil of Exigence to teleport away. I guess he'd be running either with the massive squad of Paladins or the Brotherhood Terminators, whatever Drago isn't leading. Speaking of which, basically over a quarter of the army's points is going to be in that massive Paladin squad, either led by Drago or the Grandmaster. They've got 4 Incinerators, and are just going to have spectacular damage output and be a massive unit that the opponent's going to struggle to take down. There's a squad of 5 Strike Marines that can do sticky objectives and things, and then for some heavy lifting against tanks and vehicles, there's 3 Nemesis Dread Knights, all armed with Incinerator, Psy Cannon, and Great Hammer to put the smack down on vehicles in combat. They can move very fast as well. Finally, for a bit of objective support, there's an Eversaw Assassin with Lone Operative. He's often getting the nod over the Calidus Assassin these days, given the 25-point change. And there's also a cheap squad of Void's Men at Arms with a Rotor Cannon. Could be quite a nice unit to pop up and do an action, or sit on a home objective. Next up, for the Imperial Knights, they got the rather nice advantage of their big knights being able to walk straight through walls at the risk of taking some battle shock, and also Canis Rex got quite a lot better with his stratagems changing. This list by Michael Roberts was used to take 5th at the US Goonhammer GT, going 4-on-1, I think only defeated in the last round, and this one brings 3 big knights to the table. Canis Rex himself, kind of unsurprisingly, he just brings ridiculous amounts of damage with his hitting on 2s, sustained hits, free rotate ion shields if you want it now, and melee to make a Gallant proud. Then there's the Knight Lancer, which has the banner of Macarius Triumphant. He just moves 14 inches, and now he is unencumbered by terrain. It's going to be very easy to charge against the enemy. His tank shot maybe got a little bit tamer, but he still hits like a truck. The 4+ invulnerable save is really big as well for being able to tank damage in return when he's inevitably attacked back. There's then a Knight Crusader with a thermal cannon, a nice general purpose gun turret there. He takes the Ironstorm missile pod for a little bit of indirect, and has Unyielding Paragon to debuff enemy AP. He can also make the Armiger Helverins hit a little bit better with his Bondsman ability as well. Talking of which, Armigers wise, this is one of the only Knights lists that I've seen in a long time that goes really heavy on Helverins rather than Warglaves. There's 4 of these guys, all armed with the twin autocannons and heavy stubbers, quite a lot of volume fire, and absolutely lethal against certain fly targets, particularly Catan. And finally there's a cheap Inquisitor with psychic gifts and a force weapon, I guess just here as a sort of actions and objectives type unit. Kind of handy for Knights to have a unit that costs a bit less than 140 points. Overall, cool to see the big Knights doing well, and interesting to see so many Helverins on the table in this one. Next up, let's move on to the divergent chapters of Space Marines, and for the Blood Angels, this list by Ben Jurek won first at Rage GT, going 5-0 at a 44-player event. Blood Angels do seem to have been doing particularly well at the start of the Pariah Nexus meta, and this one takes the Sons of Sanguinius detachment, as they mostly do. +1 attack and +2 strength on the charge, plus a particularly nasty damage dealing stratagem in Red Rampage. This one really is Blood Angels of the standard rush at you sort of theme. Loads and loads of scary jump packs on the table. There's 2 enormously destructive blobs of Death Company with jump packs with Inferno Pistol and Power Fist, one of them led by Lamarties for the damage boost and the -1 damage, and one led by a regular jump chaplain with the Icon of the Angel. With their massive rerolls and the detachment benefits, they've got enough threats to destroy the heart of the enemy army if either of them can get there. Just crazily scary jump pack units to be able to leap into the heart of the enemy from behind terrain. The Icon of the Angel can also force desperate escape tests as well, so it could be quite nice if you can destroy something and then consolidate into something else. Otherwise, there's also a scary Rhino full of Death Company, 2 units of 5 of them with Inferno Pistol and Power Fist, and looks like both units are headed up by a Chaplain as well. Again, the +1 to wound coming in handy there. There's a Captain with some Assault Intercessors in an Impulsor. Again, really quite a cheap, scary unit with nice rerolls on objectives, and plenty of objective control from those guys as well. 3 units of Jump Intercessors, which are just great wherever for doing secondary objectives for Space Marines, but actually become a big threat in their own right in this detachment. The Sanguinor to heroic intervene into the enemy with his fights first, to hopefully swing a key combat if you get charged, and then some Scouts and Infiltrators to hold down objectives in the home field and midboard. Overall, just enormously scary stuff there. You certainly can't ignore any of those Death Company Space Marines. They're going to punch well above their weight into the right target. And this list definitely looks like a nightmare to fight for any army that's got really big tough targets that the Death Company can really go to town on. Good to see the Blood Angels continuing to do well. Next up for the Dark Angels, they got a bunch of things that sort of look like they'll be pivoting away from Ironstorm Spearhead a bit now. Good boost to their damage output of the Deathwing Knights, and the Inner Circle Companions look like they actually have people playing them. Though it maybe still doesn't seem like First Company Task Force is having enormous amounts of success at first impressions. This list was a Gladius list run by an Alex Vian, who used it to take first at Built Forge Tough GT, going 5-0 against a 32-player Grand Tournament. And this one goes heavy on the improved units, no less than 3 units of 5 Deathwing Knights with their big -1 damage. large wound count, and nice general purpose Maces of Absolution. I guess at least some of those might be making their way in via rapid ingress perhaps. There's then Azrael, Asmodai, and an Apothecary Biologist to lead up the detachment. The Biologist looks like they're going with that big block of Eradicators just to be a ludicrously dangerous anti-tank unit. Not sure if the plan is just to run them up the board with Gladius Advance and Shoot, or if they might be reserving or even going the Land Raider Redeemer. Again, not really too sure what the exact attachment of characters and units are. We've also got Azrael and Asmodai on the field too. Feels like Asmodai would go quite well with a big unit of Inner Circle Companions. Again, could be good either from the Impulsor or the Redeemer now. I'd guess that Azrael might well be with that unit of Intercessors. A nice bodyguard for him to stay safe and farming command points for a few turns, and then can hopefully move out to fight for the mid-board slightly later in the game. Finally, there's a unit of Jump Intercessors with a Power Fist and Plasma Pistol, and 2 units of 5 Scouts. Good support for objective things. In any case, looks like an interesting list with a lot of options. I think it's definitely a victory on Games Workshop's part to get Dark Angels actually using their core unique elite units as opposed just to the same list of Ironstorm with Azrael and Darkshroud. Still seems that the Inner Circle task force isn't breaking through quite as much as some of the core Codex detachments though. Next up for the Space Wolves, there's this list by Terence Drew, using it to take 5th at Geelong Town Open, 4 wins to 1 loss at a 50-odd player tournament. A few people have been using the Champions of Rust since the updates came out. Quite nice that that's actually usable again now that you start as one of the sagas active. This one again is keeping with their Stormlance task force though. The White Scar style one where you get to advance and charge and have a whole bunch of bonuses that work with mounted units, so pretty excellent with their Thunderwolves, with their -1 to hit and wound stratagem, and a few other things. This list goes about as maximal as you can on the Thunderwolves, 3 units of 6 of them, with 3 Wolfguard Battle Leaders to lead them up. They get lethal hits and can also get the damage boost that the Thunderwolves give, and they have Hunter's Instincts and Portents of Wisdom on another one. Can be nice to have one of those scary units arrive turn 1 if needed. Then there's 2 Wolf Lords that can give you +1 to advance and charge, which gets them there even faster, and 1 unit is headed up by Logan Grimnar on Storm Rider for an enormous turn of reroll charges and reroll hits in melee. Then to support all those Thunderwolves, interestingly enough, there's 2 units of 5 Heavy Intercessors. I feel like we don't often see those in competitive Space Marine lists. I guess very chunky and probably need the same sort of firepower to take down as you'd aim at the Thunderwolves. Fairly sturdy and high objective control. 1 unit of 5 Intercessors with a Power Fist, and then a whole bunch of jump packs, 2 units of 5 Jump Intercessors, which are generally good for the actions, objectives and skirmishing, 1 unit of 5 Vanguard Veterans, which is headed up with a Chaplain. They've got really quite a long scary threat range, and they're going maximal damage with some Inferno pistols as well. And then finally there's a unit of Scouts to hold the mid-board with a Missile Launcher and Sniper, and a Lieutenant with a combi weapon for some lone operative shenanigans. Still seems like losing 10 points per Thunderwolf squad isn't enough to keep the Stormlance force down. Maybe not too surprising though, given how well this was doing prior to the whole balance update. Next up we've got the Black Templars with a list by Kevin Hamilton. This one took 2nd at Central Island Open. Again, the Black Templars had heavy hits to the Ironstorm version of their list. Seems like there's far fewer people running Ironstorm of any stripe, and these good results came with Righteous Crusaders, and really quite an interesting Horde-style Space Marine army, all built around 3 enormous blocks of Primaris Crusaders. They're really quite cheap to get loads and loads of wounds of Space Marines and Scouts onto the board. I feel like being battle line certainly won't have done them any harm at all in the new Pariah Nexus missions. Righteous Crusaders is often used to give them a 6+ feel no pain, though they can shift into the other vows if they want various different melee buffs in close combat. And it looks like these 3 enormous units are led by High Marshal Helbrecht and a Lieutenant. The Lieutenant has Turnhouse's Bones, so that squad should have a big 5+ feel no pain, and between Helbrecht and the lethal hits, that unit should kill most things in close combat if most of the Crusaders can get to swing. Then another unit has Grimoldus, who can have a 5+ feel no pain for them, or one of the other buffs if it makes more sense. And the last squad is a Judas here, who takes Perdition's Edge for a little bit more fight, but having the entire unit have fights first is really disruptive for melee units trying to take them down. Otherwise, supporting all that righteous power armor and objective control, there's a bunch of gun tanks, 2 Templar Gladiator Lancers, so big armored units can't relax either, 1 Templar Gladiator Reaper to thin out some hordes, and then a bunch of objective support, 1 squad of 5 Intercessors for sticky objectives, also having a Thunderhammer just in case you needed yet more power armor on the board, and then 1 unit of 5 Scouts with Missile Launcher and Sniper to hold down the midfield, and finally a Combi Weapon Lieutenant to mark some mid-board objectives for some rerolls and do annoying reactive move type things. Could be quite a good actions unit as well. He takes the Witch Seeker bolts, which gives you anti-psyker and devastating wounds, which could make his combi weapon go off with a bit more of a bang. Overall, really quite a cool list. Really awesome to see Black Templars just crusading straight forward with an enormous amount of black power armor, all ready to take the fight to the enemy. Finally, for the ranks of Divergent chapters, it's quite nice to not have to search too hard for a Deathwatch list this time. This list was by Kyle Fallier, who used it to take third at the Portal Summer GT, going 4-1 in a tournament of 30 players. They're kind of interesting that he didn't use any of the datasheets that went down in cost at all. No Watchmasters with their debuffing CP type aura, and no Deathwatch veterans for 100 points. The detachment used is the Black Spear for the multiple turns of damage buffs, either lethal hits, sustained hits, or precision on 6s, and they have the good relic in the Tome of Ectoclades, which allows you to put big rerolls on 2 different units, rerolling wound rolls as well. And then a nice Teleportarium style stratagem, which is quite good for big shooting units. There's an enormous unit of Devastator Centurions with twin las cannons and missiles. They'll essentially be able to warp around the board, picking off targets when they need to. Really scary to have quite that much accurate firepower and know that it's basically going to be guaranteed to get a line of sight on what it needs to. Seems that the only actual Deathwatch datasheet that was used for this one were 2 units of 5 Deathwatch Terminators. They're the ones that pay 210 points rather than 175, but get triple the heavy weapons, and these are going for 3 assault cannons per unit and then 2 Thunderhammers and Storm Shields. I guess the assault cannons are to coordinate with the Tome of Ectoclades with the reroll wound rolls. Between the lot of them, they should spit out really quite a lot of devastating wounds on any target. Otherwise, there's a really massive amount of Inceptors, 1 big unit of 6 of them with Plasma, and then 2 units of 3, 1 with Plasma and 1 with Bolters. Kind of spooky to have quite that much firepower that can drop in basically wherever it wants on the map. Could do some close range deletion and flex into the Deathwatch doctrines as needed. Plus they're also units that could threaten to return to reserves as well if it made sense. The Jump Captain with a Tome looks like he's running alongside a unit of 5 Jump Intercessors, unless he's just going completely independently. If so, then that means that they should be able to punch up a bit more than the standard datasheet there. There's 5 Infiltrators to hold down a home objective with denying reserves, a Gladiator Reaper and a Vindicator for some tanky fire support, and then a small unit of Voidsmen at Arms, which could be handy for actions and objectives and things. Deathwatch were stopped from using Scouts at all in the last data slate. Overall, nice enough to see Deathwatch doing well at any level at all. Really good to see that the actual Black Spear task force was getting used for this one. Maybe a bit of a shame not to see more kill teams on the board, but feels like quite a lot of these units make use of the good Teleportarium type things and the damage buffs of the detachment. Moving on to the Forces of Chaos next, and this one was run by Samuel Smith, using it to take first at Darksphere GT, going 5-0 at a tournament of 62 players. This one's the Pact-Bound Zealots detachment, so that's the one where you get the Chaos Marks and the amped up Dark Pacts. Not quite as savage as the Index one, but still really quite a lot of interesting stuff. It seems that the small nerf to Accursed Cultists weren't enough to put him off this, given that there's 2 units of 16 of them with attached Dark Communes for the unvulnerable saves and the really big charge distance. They take Undivided for some potential big wound rerolls if they want, and they're big tanky units that get the nasty surge move, so if they're sat on a central objective, they can just be walking straight into combat with you. There's then 2 units of 5 Legionaries in a Rhino, both marched with Slanesh and taking heavy melee weapons. They can move quite quickly and threaten to advance and charge if they need to. Just very efficient units, full stop, with some pretty nasty sustained hits in melee. There's a unit of cultists that can do sticky objectives, and they're marked with Nurgle, so could threaten the can't shoot me stratagem. A Raptor unit with Slanesh that should be good for troubleshooting and actions and things, and the same for 2 units of 3 Chaos Bikers with Melter Guns. They take Nurgle for some rapid firepower, and again the option not to be shot outside of 18 inches. Finally, there's a bit of armoured support, 2 Nurgle marked Predator Destructors with las cannons just for good sustained hits firepower, a Nurgle Vindicator to handle enemy heavies, and then an allied War Dog Carnivore. Hard to go too far wrong really with the 140 point datasheet. It moves very fast and hits very hard in close combat and has a fair bit of objective control. Overall, I think it's perhaps most interesting to see the Accursed Cultists and Dark Commune, but no things like Chaos Lords or Chosen in Rhinos at all. That's a bit different to perhaps the more normal Chaos Space Marine style. I feel like most army lists will struggle to deal with all those Accursed Cultists. They get quite a lot of option for their Surge move, as you're nowhere near going to be able to take down an entire unit in a single round of shooting, with all those invulnerable saves and wounds on the board. Next up, for the ranks of Tzeentch, we've got the Thousand Sons. They still look like they're being one of the stronger armies in 40k right now, even having taken quite a lot of nerfs to various different Kabbalistic rituals. They did get a points decrease on the Mutalith Beast, which was already kind of usable. This list by Jeremy Atkinson was used to take first at the Red Dragon July GT, a small 30-player GT, and going 4 wins, no losses and 1 draw. Leading the army, there's Magnus and Ahriman on the disc. Most Thousand Sons armies do tend to start that way. Magnus as the massive focal linchpin for all the stratagems and rituals that you want, plus just enormous psychic damage and hard to kill. Ahriman for the big +1 to wound and 1 free ritual, which usually makes him kind of auto-include between those two. Then there's 3 Infernal Masters, 1 with Arcane Vortex for the damage boost, 1 for the teleporting Umbralific Crystal, and just in general they keep some fairly heavy magical fire support coming, and then 2 Exalted Sorcerers on disc, 1 with Lord of Forbidden Lore for the ritual manipulation. They often tend to get run solo and are still pretty big for slowing down enemy forces, even if their move debuff was changed a bit. Compared with some Thousand Sons, this one goes slightly light on the Rubik Marines with just the 3 units of 5 of them, or with Soul Reapers, Warp Flamers and Warp Flame Pistol. I'd guess Ahriman would join 1 unit, and then probably Infernal Masters for the other 2 I guess, with the last one running solo. There's then 2 units of 10 Cultists, quite nice with their invulnerable save and still getting the special weapons and things. 3 units of Zangor Enlightened with great bows, nice little cheap action units that are quite expendable. A Thousand Sons Rhino to transport some rubrics into battle, and then not 1 but 2 Mutalith Vortex Beasts, extending the range on things like Doombolt and just being generally quite fearsome units overall. Really nasty to be able to threaten the enormous D6+6 damage shot. They have other usable options beyond that, plus a bit of melee. Overall still seems to be looking fairly strong for the Thousand Sons here. Next up, for the Space Marines of Khorne, we've got the World Eaters. This one was run by a Usukane RR, using it to take seconds at that Tournamenta de Hostias GT. This one going 5 wins and no losses, undefeated. This one's certainly a little bit different from the more cookie-cutter World Eaters army list. There's no Berserkers on the board whatsoever here, and 2 Forge Fiends for a little bit of Demon Engine fire support, both of which packing triple ectoplasma cannons and can be really quite nice against medium infantry. Angron leads the way as per normal, hard not to take him with his enormous damage output and chance to return which can be game winning. Lord Invocatus is here to scout up some Exalted 8-bound most likely. There's 2 enormous units of 6 of them which will kill virtually anything that they can get their chain fists into. Again, can potentially first turn charge if they scout move and you get the good movement blessings. There's 2 units of 3 regular 8-bound that can just scout normally, the leaders taking Lacerators. A unit of Jackal Cultists that can do the sticky objectives, a unit of Chaos Spawn for some small interference units, and then finally a Juggernaut Lord with Brazen Ire. Not sure if his plan will be to join some of the 8-bound or not. He could add a little bit of speed to them with their reroll, advance and charge type things. He could just be running completely solo though. The Helm of Brazen Ire basically halves damage output against him, so he is quite fast and kind of unusually tanky for a character running solo. Overall, really quite interesting stuff. 3 threats that'll basically kill whatever they touch in Angron and the Exalted 8-bound, a couple of smaller units to clean up other stuff, and some interesting anti-elite fire support from the Forge Fiends, maybe a little bit less common to see in World Eaters armies. For the Death Guard, I feel like this is one of the most unusual Death Guard army lists that I've seen. This one was run by Ian Harris, who used it to take first at Central Island Open, going 5-0 in a 32-player grand tournament. This one basically seems to be full-on armor Death Guard. 9 big vehicles on the board, and then a whole bunch of Terminators to deal damage beyond that. Literally no Plague Marines or any sort of chaff units to hold objectives and things. Just full-on armoured might of the Plague Legions. For the Death Shroud Terminators, there's 2 very mighty units of 6 of them, which are enormous threats in their own right. Looks like Typhus is leading one with his big mortal wound damage and chunky stat line, and the Lord of Virulence is leading the other one. He does both have 3 Defilers and a Plague Burst Crawler to boost with his damage output, getting +1 to hit and ignore cover for blast weapons, which is exactly what the Defilers want with their Strength 10 and AP 1. I guess the Terminators might well be either deep striking or rapid ingressing in. I guess could maybe advance towards a midfield objective if they wanted though, I suppose. And then backing up the Defilers are 3 Predator Annihilators with las cannons, a Hellbrute with the Hammer and Twin Heavy Bolter. Kind of an interesting choice of loadout there for the Heavy Bolter, but maybe it's just there literally to be able to put out the Contagion debuff reliably. I have a feeling that this one will probably be using the AP debuff, so all that Defiler fire and things would be hitting with better AP. Then there's a Plague Burst Crawler with Plague Spitters and a Feated Bloat Drone also with Plague Spitters. Plenty of infantry clearance there, given the list maybe doesn't have quite as much to deal with chaff hordes perhaps. And overall it's just really quite an odd and unusual list, but certainly seems to have had good effect here. This list definitely goes all in on the damage, though I feel like you would have to play with it kind of carefully. There's not very much objective control here, and a fair amount of the units might have trouble just moving slowly or going around terrain and things. But it certainly looks like going all in on damage dealers just gives you enough holes and scary threats to likely win firefights pretty handily overall. Pretty interesting to see, even if it's probably not the way that most people want to play Death Guard. Certainly using some unusual units here. I certainly haven't seen many people taking Predator Annihilators or Defilers for them in general. Maybe there's a bit more room for them since the Plague Burst Crawlers had their indirect fire nerfed a bit, to be fair. Next up for Chaos, we've got the Chaos Knights. Unfortunately, despite the Super Heavies getting quite a nice buff with their entire walk-through walls thing, it doesn't seem to have been enough to tempt the majority of players away from mass War Dogs. I guess it is a little bit less impactful for Chaos Knights, as they could access that when they needed to via a stratagem. In any case, this army list was run by James Lighton, who used it to take third at the Dumfries Gamers 40K Charity GT, going 4 wins to 1 loss. The main list is 11 War Dogs, a War Dog Stalker with Slaughter Claw, Chain Cannon and Havoc Launcher, and then just basically spam of the 2 best War Dog datasheets, 5 War Dog Brigands with Havoc Launchers, and then 5 War Dog Carnivores with Havoc Launchers, both of them massively destructive in their own way, whether it's the scary 2+ firepower of the Brigands with the Big Melter and the Chain Cannon, or the War Dog Carnivores that are a threat to literally anything that they can catch in melee. Finally, backing up them are a unit of Nurglings and a unit of Plague Bearers for some demon support, and then 2 Beasts of Nurgle. Pretty handy to have some annoying tanky objective holders and screens and things in the Pariah Nexus. They should be quite good for doing actions and holding down objectives on the Plague Bearers part. Will be interesting to see if any Chaos Knight lists manage to make some big knights work at some point. Finally, for the ranks of Chaos, we've got the Chaos Demons. They're certainly an army that won pretty big at the last balance update. They're already pretty strong Greater Demons, getting some nice auras of projecting the shadow of chaos, and this list by a Blair McDonald's was used to take first at Geekfest Summer Heat, going 5-0 at a 32-player tournament. The Bloodthirster that also went down in points cost features here. He takes the Great Axe and then Argath King of Blades for the relic. It is pretty big that the Greater Demons always count as being within the shadow of chaos for their enhancements essentially, so they always get the boosted power of them. And also being able to do things like use that aura to drop things like the Blood Crushers at close range for charges is fairly massive. And always being able to advance and charge when needed is very nice for Bloodthirsters as well. There's then a Great Unclean one, interestingly enough taking the Bell rather than the Bile Sword. I guess that could be handy enough for resurrecting those Plague Bearers if they're running next to him. And his Endless Gift is now going to be a 4+ feel no pain all the time from that enhancement, so he's just spectacularly ridiculously hard to take down to the point where it's just not really worth bothering. Otherwise, there's a fair bit of corn stuff. Skull Takers leading up a unit of 10 Bloodletters, which could be a nice close deep strike type option. There's a Renmaster on a Blood Throne that can amp up either the Bloodletters or the Blood Crusher units that were mentioned. Either of those will get far more dangerous when that's around. There's some Nurglings that can screen out the mid-board, some Plague Bearers for some objective control, 2 individual Beast of Nurgle, which are quite nice action doers and chunky tanky units for the demons. Again, a lone War Dog Carnivore, interestingly enough, to rip and tear and threaten some big damage in the middle of the field. And finally, the lower points cost of the Skull Cannon seems to have made them tempting enough. I guess they could hold down the backfield and threaten some Battle Shock tests, which I guess are a little bit more relevant for demons with their Shadow of Chaos. I feel like that Bloodthirster is maybe one of the most terrifying things about the list, being able to move super fast, hit incredibly hard, and then put down corn units at close range are a seriously nasty set of things to be going on with, and that Great Unclean one can then just make a nuisance of himself, being near impossible to kill. Moving on to the Xenos now, and the Tyranids are certainly having a good time of it since the massive amount of buffs they got. A fair few people experimenting with things like Vanguard Onslaught and Synaptic Nexus, but this one's an invasion fleet list run by Andrew Hope, who used it to take 5th at that Dark Sphere July GT. There's really quite a lot of update relevant things in the army. The Swarm Lord's on the board, and he's got the -1 command point aura that he projects. As he moves forward to get stuck in, that could certainly cost the enemy some painful choices in stratagems. He does hit quite a lot harder at the first place, with being strength 10 in Synapse as well. There's a massive amount of Lictors, Death Leaper himself with some Battle Shock tests, and then 3 individual Lictors and 2 Neurolictors on top of that. So just going kind of mad for the lone operatives there. Lots of annoying threats that could either rapid ingress or make other units have to test Battle Shock. I feel like with the amount of Battle Shock tests flying around there are going to be some things on the mid-board that fail. There's Old One Eye leading up a brood of 2 Carnifexes with maximal Death Spitters, so kind of interesting in really quite a shooter unit with Old One Eye's rerolls, and then still having quite a lot of threat in melee due to Old One Eye himself being able to get stuck in. They're quite a nice unit to be able to put the 5+ Feel No Pain stratagem on as well. Finally, for the HQ section, there's a Hive Tyrant, armed with Venom Cannon and Bone Sword. He now has the aura of lethal hits that'll be quite nice for the Carnifexes or the Exocrine or Maleceptor, and help them be a bit more effective against tough stuff if you don't happen to have taken the lethal hits on the invasion fleet itself. Otherwise, beyond that, there's a whole load of objective scorers, some gargoyles for the move shoot move, and just generally useful to have in virtually any game. 11 Neurogaunts for a cheap unit of wounds with some objective control and can help transmit synapse if needed. A cheap Pyrovore, which is a nice option for doing actions and things, and a Biovore, which still seems to be a really quite popular inclusion in army lists. He can still just sit on a home field objective and do a bit of backfield screening, and still throw out Spore Mines for board control, and a few secondaries still matter for them, like Engage on all fronts. Finally, it looks like the Tyrannifex with the Rupture Cannon was interesting enough to make its way into a competitive list for once. D6 plus 6 damage was a big upgrade for him. Seems like the Casino Cannon has been seen as good enough to be worthy of the include to try and pop some enemy tanks. Overall, really quite a lot of cool stuff there. Nice to see so many update relevant things all being in play at once. And feels like this list will be super hot on the actions, having quite so many small units running around. No less than 6 lone operatives will be a bit of a nightmare to catch up with. Next up, for the Genestealer Cults, Grand Tournament placings have been kind of thin on the ground since their codex, unfortunately. One of the only ones was this list by Nicholas Eck, who used it to take 4th at the Dark Sphere GT. This one's using the Host of Ascension, so the one with the close drop and the big damage out of Deep Strike. It certainly looked like one of the strongest attachments on paper when the codex came out, even if it arguably lost a bit of power compared with before. Looks like some of the big primary damage dealers of this list are 3 big units of Neophytes, one with a Primus attached with a chink in their armour for some lethal hits. It potentially means that that entire unit can have sustained and lethal hits on a 5+ with full rerolls, which is going to make a bit of a mess, even if the Neophytes did have their shooting profiles nerfed a little bit and going a bit more scattergun, having to take a mix of mining lasers, seismic cannons, grenade launchers and webbers. It looks like the Primus unit is also being led by the Nexus as well, who will help out with stratagems. Then the other 2 units look like they're being led by a Benefactus, one of which has Assassination Edict for a big damage buff against characters. Again, they can have lethal hits, so you could have sustained and lethal hits on a 5+ if you wanted to use the stratagem for them. And they look like quite scary threats to have to be able to drop in and just take a big chunk out of whatever they fire at. The Benefactors can chip in with their big las cannon style shots too. Then, interestingly, there's 2 Abominants, which look like they're running solo. I guess the idea with them is that they could drop in and maybe do secondary type objectives, perhaps drop in the backfield, and then with their regeneration stand-up type rule, they should be able to get back up again and continue to do things like behind enemy lines or maybe deploying locust things. And then there's a Biophagus with a massive unit of 10 Aberrants with Our Time Is Nigh. That's the one that gives you a +2 to charge rolls once per battle, so I guess the idea is that they might come out of Deep Strike potentially, and then get a 7-inch charge, re-roll a ball, that's a very good chance to get in. They'll still tear apart any elite infantry that they catch. They certainly took nerfs compared with pre-codex though. Kind of interesting to still see them making the cut, though I guess with a very high odds charge out of Deep Strike with both sustained and lethal hits once again, maybe the overall combo could be worth it. Otherwise, there's a Clamorous for objective work and Deep Strike denial, a Calamorph for a lone operative with a bunch of pistols and it's hard to catch up with, a scouting unit of Metamorphs with Hand Flamers, and they've got the annoying surge move type thing, so it can be problematic to take down on objectives, 5 pure strain Genestealers to infiltrate and screen and things, and they could potentially do first turn charges if they wanted. 2 units of Acolytes with the auto pistols and mining weapons. They can potentially rustle up some command points on objectives if they want, and do have a bit of melee threat. And then finally 3 individual Achilles Ridge Runners with mortars, one of the best data sheets in the index, and they can hand out both ignores, cover, and extra AP on the units that most need it, meaning that most of the army should be hitting on +1 AP most of the time essentially. Overall, really quite a lot of interesting tricks. Good to see that someone's managing to make new style Genestealer Cults work. I feel like they're a bit more challenging than pre-Codex. For the Aeldari, we've got an Inari battle host here. The Aeldari initially seem to have been doing at least okay in Pariah Nexus, given their small units that move dead fast, getting on really well with doing the hard to achieve secondaries. If Rain's heading up this list, even with the points increase, her Storm of Whispers still being very nasty against enemy infantry. I'd guess she's probably running with that unit of Storm Guardians with the sticky objectives, and they can put out a bit of close range firepower as needed. Otherwise, there's 2 units of Shadow Spectres with their anti-elite sort of firepower and their jump shoot jump. 1 fast unit of Skyweavers with Zephyr Glaives and Haywire Cannons, a pretty fast unit that should be able to hunt down some outlying threats and isn't quite as instantly easy to remove as some, I guess. Quite a lot of infiltrators between 2 mandrakes and 1 squad of striking scorpions with a biting blaze. The mandrakes should be extra nice for doing actions with their fade away. 3 units of 5 warp spiders for near enough guaranteed doing certain actions and getting to parts of the board, plus can do some nasty damage with their torrent devastating wounds as well. And then a whole load of anti-tank firepower from complete safety, 3 support weapons all with D cannons to threaten anything that moves up into the mid-board, and then 2 units of 5 scourges. Interestingly, not just going for dart lances though, 1 squad taking heat lances and 1 squad taking haywire. Again, more jump shoot jump shenanigans that can hit the enemy without having to worry about being hit themselves. Overall, looks like a very tricksy Eldar list to play as per standard. A lot of the time you might just not have anything to shoot at or get your teeth into whatsoever, and a lot of things that can inflict damage from relative safety with their jump shoot jumps. Feels like it'd be hard to stop this list scoring really quite high as well, at least on the secondary objectives. Lots and lots of small units that can be expended towards the end of the game when they no longer desperately need to survive and hide. In any case, it looks pretty nasty to play against. It was run by Alan Davidson, who used it to take second at that Dumfries Gamers charity GT. Next up, we've got the Darkkin, who used their Sky Splinter to win the biggest tournament of the last weekend. This list by Garza Garceta took first at that Tormenta de Hostias GT, going 5-0 against a field of 62 players. The Archons did quite well as the change to the command point debuff. They're generally fast-moving and dangerous HQs that want to be throwing themselves up the board and getting into the midst of the enemy army, and then anything within 12 inches will have to pay extra CP for their stratagems, and that can be really impactful. Looks like there's 3 Archons here, one with the Nightmare Shroud, the one that stops you being overwatched when you're jumping out of your raider and charging in, and there's also Drazar here as well. Between those 4, I'd guess it would be 1 Archon in the Kabbalite Warriors and the Court of the Archon squad, and then Drazar and the remaining Archon, one in the unit of 10 Incubi and the other in the other unit of 5 Incubi. The Sky Splinter Assault means that they can get lance melee when they jump out of transports, plus there's the very nasty move drop charge stratagem, which means that you can get a squad of Incubi from one side of the board to the other and into combat. Very nasty when you can't even threaten to overwatch them if you've got something good to. Then otherwise there's a Beastmaster to scout up the board and be an annoying threat, tying stuff up and move blocking as needed. Lilith Hesperax leading a big unit of 10 Witches for another very long charge threat. 3 units of Scourges for their jump shoot jump. 2 of these take dart lances and 1 squad takes haywire. Again, utterly frustrating to try and take out, and they get a free reign with shooting most armies. 2 units of 5 mandrakes that can screen out the mid-board with infiltrating if needed, or otherwise just fade away around the board doing secondaries. They're all transported in 2 raiders and 4 venoms. Looks like it'll be the big squad of Incubi and the big squad of Witches with Lilith in the raiders, I suppose, and then split Kabbalite Warriors, the Court of the Archon and the smaller Incubi in the venoms, and finally 1 Kronos Parasite engine as really quite a tanky little monster that farms extra pain tokens, or to plug in just a little bit more damage. Drukhari do seem to be doing rather well in the Pariah Nexus mission so far. Lots of fast-moving units that are quite good for getting to objectives, and those Archons in particular really could ruin the plan of quite a lot of armies. There's a good chance that a lot of things that want to use stratagems will be caught by that debuff. Next up, for the Legions of the Tomb Worlds, we've got the Necrons with this Hypercrypt Legion. This one was run by David Necron and Ducas, so he's got an appropriate name there, using it to take third at that Tormenta de Hostias for 1 against a 62-player GT. It seems that more Necron players are running Hypercrypt and the Awakened Dynasty now after the big nerfs to Canoptech Court, though it still doesn't look like it's been enough to turn him off using a big unit of Wraiths. There's a Technomancer and 6 Wraiths here as a very tanky unit to skirmish on the midboard. Otherwise, the list has a Monolith in it, so that'd be quite nice for threatening some big redeployment type stratagems. They can actually be reduced in cost by Necron Overlords now. There is an Overlord with the Translocation Shroud who looks like he's with a unit of 10 Immortals, and they could threaten to do those movement redeploy type things for 1 CP, and that feels like could be quite a big win for them. Otherwise, they can just move really quite fast with that Translocation Shroud and stack a whole load of wounds on things on objectives. It looks like they're also running with the Plasmancer with Arisen Tyrant, so that unit will get lots of rerolls when they appear on the board. And the Plasmancer gives them critical hits on a 5+ as well, so pretty spectacular volume fire from them. There's then a Locust Lord with the Osteoclave Fulcrum that allows Deep Strike. He's running with 6 Locust Destroyers, so that's a pretty scary gun squad that can go warping around the board, blasting things off objectives. Again, they've got critical hits on 5s with a bunch of lethal hits Gauss, so they'll take a chunk out of literally anything. And then finally for the HQs, there's Imitek the Stormlord, who's leading a really big tanky block of Lich Guard, which is fun. I feel like these guys are maybe a little bit underrated, perhaps seeing it play a bit more again now the Canoptech Wraiths have gone up in cost. A fairly cheap and tanky block of Lich Guard with swords and boards. Imitek has some okay stat lines and can farm up the command points for other tricks. And then finally we've got 2 units of Death Marks who can go teleporting about and either doing secondaries or perhaps taking pot shots at characters if it makes sense. And lastly, a Catan Shard of the Nightbringer, always quite nice in Hypercrypts to be able just to fling him towards the opponent right from turn 1, even if he can't use the 3-inch Deep Strike stratagem anymore. Overall, quite a cool Necron list with a bunch of different elements to it. Nice to maybe see a little bit more balance as opposed to spam of 1 or 2 things. I quite like seeing the Translocation Shroud Overlord and Imitek with the Lich Guard. Both of those feel like they haven't been done as much before in top lists recently. Next up for the Space Dwarves Leagues of Votann, we've got this list by Tom Lewis, placing 3rd at Dark Sphere GT, and going 4 wins, 1 draw and no losses. The league's got their Hernkin Jaeger unit in the previous update, and there is a unit of them present with shotguns and the Magna Coil rifle. Quite nice to do some screening to protect all those Sagittars and Hernkin Pioneers to be able to move up into the midboard safely. Plus it's just nice to have 10 bodies on an objective from the start of the game and be in the right place to start doing secondaries if they need to. Then otherwise the list is headed up by a Carl, which I'm not 100% certain, but I guess maybe he's joining one of the Hearthkin units, likely split in half by Sagittars. He's got a Teleport Crest and Appraising Glare. I guess it's not impossible that one of the characters might be running solo, but otherwise it makes sense for the Einherjar champions to join the Einherjar Hearthguard units, 2 units of 5 of them, with Concussion Gauntlets, Vulcanites and Hammers, and looks like they're taking up residence in the Hecaton Land Fortresses. 2 big scary gun tanks with the SP Conversion Beamer, Bolt Cannons and Scanners. They look like they're 2 hard-as-nails units that'll make good use of Void Armor and the Sustained Hit stratagem. Then there's those 3 Sagittars which take the High-Las Beam Cannons, and they'll be transporting some Hearthkin and then 2 units of Chthonian Berserks. Nice generally dangerous transports with a bit of scary kin melee on board. And the Hearthkin Warrior Squad that splits might well be able to camp the home field objectives and put sticky objectives on that. They take Ion Blasters and kin melee weapons. Finally, there's 3 units of Hernkin Pioneers with the High-Las Rotary Cannons, the Searchlight and the Scanner. With their volume autocannon fire, they can be quite good to put a whole load of hurt on the doubly marked Judgment token units that you get at the start of the game, and then farm the extra command points from that. Overall, really quite a well-rounded Leagues of Votann list, now with the addition of Hernkin Jaegers on top of much of their normal stuff. Still seems like they're doing okay overall in the competitive game. Next up, the Orks certainly took some pretty heavy nerfs in the last update. Given that Green Tide and Bully Boys were hit quite so convincingly, a lot of people seem to have been pivoting towards Warhorde, just a nice general purpose boost to melee and stratagems to make you tougher or help you get there. This list is one of those, and it was run by Randy Brigham, using it to take 3rd at Battle for the Capital, going 4 wins and 1 draw. Squighog boys take a massive great big pride of place in this one. There's a beast boss on a Squigosaur looking like they're leading 8 Squighog boys. A truly massive unit if you wanted to give that the -1 to wound stratagem to make them very hard to kill. Lots and lots of wounds with some good feel no pain, and they'll certainly like the invulnerable save from the War as well. Otherwise the 3 war bosses, each with power claws and one with follow me lads, the one that allows you a little bit more movement. I'd guess that they're running each with the Nob squads. There's 3 units of 5 of them, probably loaded into the trucks. I guess in theory they could lead the boys as well, though I feel like the Nobs probably make more sense with the -1 to wound and +1 to hit type things. Otherwise there's 3 units of Flash Gits who have some alright close range firepower and still some melee that should threaten lighter infantry as well just through sheer volume of attacks. 2 units of Gretchen to rustle up some command points and just be some very cheap objective control bodies. 2 Storm Boys to help out with actions and secondaries, and Boss Snickrot who will also help a lot on that front. 1 unit of basic boys that can put sticky objectives down on points, and 1 more unit of 4 Squighog boys, just general purpose threats that should be fairly nasty against both medium infantry and vehicles. Overall, really quite a lot of good and violent Orky units here, a lot of which will use the stratagems really quite nicely. Finally, last but not least, we have the Tau Empire, an army that people seem to be feeling a bit more positive about, given that they got a fair few fun buffs to crisis suits and things last time around. Retaliation Cadre definitely got a big increase from that, given how central crisis suits are to that, and this list by Rain Avery seems to have used it to good effect, going first at Winchester GT, 5 wins to no losses. Given that people were a bit borderline in their use of crisis suits before, this list has 4 units of them, all headed up by commanders of their own sort. Looks like they're fairly on theme with their squad's purpose. I guess that Farsight is probably running with the Sunforge suits. He can give them +1 to wound at close range, and he can discount the 2 CP stratagem that allows them to drop super close, so they can turn up right by an enemy unit and just absolutely nuke it off the board with +1 to wound and huge rerolls. And then there's 2 units of Staff Scythe suits, 1 with flamers and 1 with burst cannons, and they both seem to have an attendant commander that does the same. 1 Cold Star with quad flamers and grenade racks, and the other Cold Star commander with high output burst cannon, 2 burst cannons and cyclic ion blaster. They'll make good use of the Star Scythe anti-infantry type buffs. Finally, there's an Enforcer commander who has the Starflare ignition system to allow him to jump on and off the board. He's got quad missile pods, as do the Fire Knife suits that he's leading. Could be an interesting unit to do the jump shoot jump type thing with them. Some really quite nice general purpose firepower that the opponent should really struggle to keep up with. Otherwise, to spot some targets and infiltrate in the midfield, there's 3 units of stealth suits, very nice for the reroll ones to hit and to wound. 1 unit of 10 Kroot Carnivores for some sticky objective goodness, I guess. And then some interesting backfield fire support with not 1 but 3 ghost kills. 2 with fusion colliders, so I guess maybe playing a little bit more aggressively with the melter action, and 1 with ion raker, and all have fusion blasters to back them up. It means that on the first turn of the game, I guess you could have these guys in fairly threatening positions and know that your opponent can't really shoot them. Otherwise, for a little bit of dedicated fire support, there's 2 Sky Rays with burst cannons. They should be able to take some chunks out of some enemy armor, and there's finally Dark Strider just run solo. I guess just here for his 12-inch deny reserves type thing, which is handy enough to have on an objective, provided he doesn't get just shot by some indirect or something. Overall, cool to see Retaliation Cadre in play and doing well. Looks like a lot of those battle suits could be getting extra nasty with the extra strength and AP that it brings. And nice to see that Tau Empire can absolutely have crisis suits and commanders in pride of place at the new lower points costs. In any case, I think I'll leave that there for this one. As always, let me know your thoughts on the army lists, and in particular any other insights or things that I might have missed about them. Obviously none of these were army lists that I've run, so I'm sure I've missed all sorts of things about them. As mentioned, feel free to check out the link down in the video description if you'd like to pick up some Auspex dice. They are all a bit new, and I feel like the chap from Baron of Dice has done a really good job with them. You can find them linked in the video description. It seems that the black ones were really quite popular and seem to have sold out already. There's still a fair few of the white ones left though, perhaps slightly more classic channel logo colours. In any case, if you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to the channel. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel and you want to help keep them coming, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description, linked down below. Channel patrons do get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, an automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.